Good people, welcome to the latest episode of Jonathan Thinks. I am Jonathan Collins, your friendly neighborhood democracy scholar. I've got a few things on my mind, and maybe, just maybe, you've been thinking about them too. The first thing on my mind is this U.S. Senate race in Texas, and especially the Democratic primary. I can't stop thinking about this. It's fascinating. It's fascinating because it involves the political rock star that is Jasmine Crockett. And so, long story short, Jasmine Crockett runs for Senate in this Democratic primary against James Talarico, and she suffers a narrow defeat. And the question that I think we all have been asking here is, man, what happened to Jasmine Crockett? How did we get here? And I think there are two explanations. One explanation is actually that the system was, I won't say rigged against her, but it was definitely working not in her favor. So, if you were following the campaign, you saw that as soon as the election was pretty much decided, when she conceded, we saw public remarks from Jasmine Crockett complaining about the election process and basically saying that there were some unfair things that were happening. And honestly, optics wise, it was a pretty bad look because it looks like the star player who's complaining to the referees instead of just playing the game and trying to win. And so I think a lot of people overlooked this and didn't have sympathy for her claim. Into it a little bit more closely, you find actually she had a point. So there were a couple of things that happened that were really crucial in this campaign. I mean, in this election. Right before the election was supposed to take place, they made a change to the rules. This was in the Dallas area. They made a change to the rules that, you were restricted to certain polling locations that you could vote in. And this was made by the Republican Party that had influence over the county commission that was administering the election. So now suddenly, if you were living in Dallas and you were used to just kind of voting in the polling place that you liked or that you preferred or that was convenient for you, maybe it was closer to your job instead of being closer to your house. And now suddenly, right before the election, a rule change happens and that's now not in the cards. You can't do that. And so people who were showing up at polling places thinking that they could vote, they were being turned away. This confusion led one of the lower courts in Texas to actually extend the voting hours to 9 o'clock so that more folks could vote, given that confusion. But then guess what? The state Supreme Court stepped in and they struck that down and said no voting will be counted after 7 o'clock in the afternoon. And so if you voted after 7 o'clock in the Dallas area, your vote was considered provisional and may or may not be counted. So you put these together and actually it looks like they were out to get Jasmine Crockett. It looks like she had a target on her back, and the Republican Party, bullseye, didn't miss the target. And you ask, well, why? Why Jasmine Crockett in a primary? Why would they target her? And it comes to the issue that I think folks are developing with Jasmine Crockett, which was it just felt like she was in it for the clout just a little bit too much, that she was doing it for the clout, doing it for the clout. We kept seeing her everywhere on CNN, MS News, social media. We couldn't escape the media figure that had become Jasmine Crockett. And it just raised questions about what kind of community are you building in your district? What kind of work are you doing? What's your ground game like in the state of Texas? Are you really building that multiracial coalition that you need? Are you getting Latino voters involved? Are you reaching out to white liberal voters who could maybe swing your way? The whole idea of Texas turning blue, I think a lot of folks thought Jasmine Crockett was going to be a key piece to that. Turns out that's not going to be the case. And for two reasons. On the one hand, the Republican Party was clearly out to get her. On the other hand, she didn't do herself any favors by coming out and doing it for the clout. But hey, that's what I think. I want to know what you think. Drop your ideas in the comments. Tell me what you think about Jasmine Crockett's race, her campaign, her political future now. What's going on? Is it over? Should she have not started her campaign with that weird ad, taking a swing at Donald Trump and, telling Trump to keep her name out of his mouth? Or was that fair game? Was that good strategy? Let me know. What do you think? Another thing I want to know what you think about is the racist controversy that happened in the state of Florida. So recently, the Florida International University Republican, this is like a Republican student club, right? Oh, college Republicans, I'm sorry. No, they went viral for us finding out that, surprise, surprise, they have a WhatsApp group chat that had been circulating all kinds of racist messages. We're talking about over 4,000 times the N-word was used. We're talking anti-Semitic language, derogatory remarks made about the idea of dating Jewish women, even messages suggesting that Black people should be killed. It was filth on top of filth, garbage on top of garbage. It was just disgusting discourse that was happening in this group chat. And, one thing is that this is not new. If you remember, in October of last year, the National Young Republicans group was exposed for a group chat that had similar racist messages. But this was something that Vice President J.D. Vance came out and called pearl clutching, or at least the reaction to these racist messages. No big deal. It's just, boy talking in a group chat. This means nothing. Okay, well, here we go in Florida, the same thing happening again. And, the thing that I think is most concerning about this is not just that we see once again a group of Republicans engaging in this behavior online. To me, the bigger issue is the fact that they are young Republicans engaging in this kind of behavior. I think, we worked under this assumption that, well, there's old-fashioned racism and then there's a new society. And we thought the old-fashioned racism days were over. The Jim Crow days are gone. That point in history where white folks were, saying all kinds of racist, derogatory slurs and openly disrespecting and discriminating against Black people, the evil, vile form of racism that motivated the civil rights movement, oh, those days are long past. Even if you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, it became an indictment on specific police officers, bad apples. But nothing suggesting that we had a problem with old-fashioned racism still being alive and well in the U.S. Well, you look at these group chats and it tells you not only are Republicans still engaging in this kind of conversation, but again, young Republicans. We're talking about people in their 20s, people that were born into a world of Martin Luther King Jr. days, born into a world where we celebrate the civil rights movement, where the civil rights heroes are considered just that, heroes, and where the idea of being racist used to be publicly, socially unacceptable. And now somehow this is in the cards. This is what young Republicans, this is what college students are talking about. And it just raises the question, if this is what young white folks in their 20s have to say about Black folks in America, where's the hope of racial unity? Where's the hope of a multiracial society? Political science, we study this concept called racial resentment, and we've been studying it now for going back into like the 1980s, really longer than that, maybe 1960s. But 1980s, we started really studying it consistently. And so one of the things that I did, I made this graph, and it just shows you racial resentment over time. And it's been interesting. And it's been interesting how you see this decline in racial resentment that's been happening, especially in response to the rise of Donald Trump. That Donald Trump and his racist comments and his embrace of Proud Boys and white supremacists, this has triggered the American citizenry as a whole, and especially white Americans, to say, okay, this has gone too far. Levels of racial resentment are actually lowering in response to what we've seen from Trump. But if we're seeing young Republicans embrace this kind of language, it makes me wonder, are we actually seeing that rejection of Donald Trump's messages? Or are we seeing a moment where people are just getting really, really, really good and sophisticated at hiding their racist sentiments? I don't know if it's the latter. Again, what hope do we have of any kind of racial unity? But that's my issue. Those are my concerns. I want to know your concerns. Is there any hope of a multiracial democracy? What do you think about racial unity? Am I tripping? Am I making too big of a deal of the fact that these are young Republicans? Is this something you expected to happen? Or should we really actually be up in arms about the idea that the next generation, we're talking about Gen Z, um, you know, white Republicans are engaging in this kind of and normalizing racist conversation and behavior and dialogue? Let me know what you think. And then the last topic brings us back to where we ended last week, which is Iran. Now, I came out and I was very clear. Hey, we need to be careful with the takes. This is a very, very complicated situation. There's all kind of force behind the winds of this thing here. And on the one hand, of course, it's Iran's adversarial relationship to Israel and the growing conflict in the Middle East. And that has its own issue. And of course, the religious battle between those two countries, and of course, America's consistent allegiance to Israel. So that you do have that dynamic. There's also the desire to control the oil supply that Iran has. There's also, of course, the nuclear threat that Iran has been for decades now, and that multiple presidents have negotiated treaties or agreements with Iran to try to stabilize or limit their use of uranium that could be used to make nuclear weaponry. And then, of course, there's a thing that we're not talking about, which is being careful with Iran because of its politics. And so Trump, after partnering with Israel to drop countless missiles in the Middle East, aiming at Iran and neighboring allies, Trump is now coming out saying that he wants to play a role in selecting Iran's next leader. And man, you need to be really careful here because a couple problems. One, the last time the U.S. played a role in selecting Iran's leader, it actually led to the cementing of an incredibly authoritarian regime. And it actually gave food to a political reaction. So when the U.S. stepped in the last time, basically we gave food to the reactionary movement that ended up overthrowing the Iranian government and actually instilling the regime that they've had in place pretty much ever since. So that's one thing, is that you're giving momentum and food to the allies. I mean, to the enemies. The other thing is that, man, Iran has a very complicated political situation. Iran is what you could call a presidential theocracy. It's not a democracy. It's a place where they have elections. They do select a president, and they do elect a Congress or a parliament. But everything flows through this essentially like League of Guardians that are essentially appointed by God or the supreme leader who is operating under his understanding of what God's will is for the people. And everything flows through the supreme leader and these guardians. So who can even run for president flows through this uh, this religious leadership group. What rules are passed and actually enacted flows through this elite leadership group. And it's a country that, again, has democracy happening on the surface, but underneath, it's just a few big dogs that determine everything. And if you look at the kind of democracy that Donald Trump has been trying to turn the U.S. into, kind of sounds familiar. I'm not going to go as far as to say that Donald Trump is turning the U.S. into Iran, but he's been very much using the executive power to stretch and stretch and stretch and create the conditions where the rules, the policies, who can run and who's a viable candidate, whether we see elections as real or fake. He wants those kinds of questions to all flow through the presidency, and it's looking real familiar. So, hey, the idea of Donald Trump playing a role in selecting Iran's next leader, next supreme leader, not only is this inappropriate, but we should find it terrifying. But that's what I think. I want to know what you think about the Iran situation. Again, very complicated. So I think we should be thinking about this and working through it together. So drop some lines in the comments. Let me know what you think about Iran, the Iran situation, about Trump's involvement. And we got to figure this out together. And, well, good people, that concludes today's episode of Jonathan Thinks. Again, I am Jonathan Collins, your friendly neighborhood democracy scholar. Thank you to our producer, Mo, who's working behind the scenes. Remember that every time we convene, it's an opportunity to grow. We do it with love, we do it with joy, and we do it together. These are a few of my thoughts, and who knows, maybe, just maybe, you were thinking them too. Matter of fact, hit the comments, let us know exactly what you think. And until next week, peace.